Now, I have been enjoying living with you in the 80s this morning. You've been sharing about what you watched on TV, what you listened to on the radio, or maybe what you were recording onto your cassette tapes, and hoping somebody like me didn't talk over the end of the song. You've been telling me about what you were wearing and those iconic hairstyles and the fashion, as Linda was saying, and what you were doing. Psychology consultant Dr. Jo Lukens is with me. Good morning.
Good morning, Susan.
Have you been enjoying being in the 80s with me today?
I'm happy to be in the 80s every day.
Now, we think of Dr. Jo obviously as a psychologist, and she's very professional, and I don't want to destroy your credibility, Dr. Jo, but what were you wearing in the 80s?
I was in my prime, Susan. So much like Linda said, it was the fluorescent socks, it was the white high heel shoes with the cutout triangles, it was the frying pan earrings. There was a lot going on.
So we talk a lot about nostalgia on this program because everybody loves to think back to those memories. Why does music in particular, which we were hearing earlier with the book from Jane Gazzo, why does music seem to be particularly effective at evoking that nostalgia?
It is effective, and because when anything taps into our senses, it brings back memories for us, and the auditory memory is particularly powerful. So we know that music from whichever generation that we're listening to it from really activates the areas in the brain that are responsible for things such as memory and emotion and reward. So we listen to a familiar song and it's like it transports us back in time. And you could hear it, couldn't you, when Linda and Warren were speaking? You could hear the joy in their voices, and I was loving the blonde mullet notion. So we know that it takes us back to a time, and we also know that when we think back, we tend to we tend to look back fondly because we forget a lot of the stuff that was hard. If we look at our modern day challenges, we complain a lot and whinge a lot, but when we look back, we tend to have much fonder memories. So that's part of the other thing that's happening, particularly in relation to the music.
Yes, and of course the 80s was 20 years ago, as I think most people still think of the 80s being 20 years ago. So I wonder what people are going to be saying in 20 or 40 years' time from about now.
Absolutely.
That'll be interesting.
We're living through people's future nostalgia right now.
That's true. So how does that nostalgia triggered by music affect our emotional state? Is it good for us?
Yeah, it largely it is. It's a fairly complex system about how it happens, but for most people it will be predominantly positive. We know that it can improve mood. We know it can help to reduce anxiety because it takes us back to a familiar, hopefully comfortable time. Normally you would put a song on because you've chosen that song, so that's generally how that might go. There are times, this obviously varies individually, and we may also go back to sad songs from our day and those sorts of things as well, but we generally consider nostalgic music to be one that enhances well-being by positively impacting our emotions.
So if it positively, for the most part, impacts our emotions, can listening to nostalgic type music be actually beneficial for our mental health?
Yes, it can be. So it can help us to self-regulate. It can help us to reduce our stress levels. It can certainly help to improve our mood. We may, it may have an impact in terms of influencing our self-esteem and our confidence as well. And the other thing that it does is it helps us feel connected. So if you and I were sitting around and we heard a song that we both knew, then by default that brings us closer together. So it serves so many different functions, and particularly if you go to a community event and they bring out the classics, whatever they might be, or the pub songs, those sorts of things as well, it brings people together. And so all of those things tap into our emotional well-being.
That memory of being at a roller disco with your friends.
Absolutely. And whether you go in which corner you go into when they played that card game that I seem to remember that they used to do as well.
How does that music evoked nostalgia different from other forms of nostalgia?
Probably the main difference is its immediacy and its intensity. Like the second you put a song on, we know that mood is a big trigger for changing mood and emotion, and it doesn't take very long for that effect to impact upon us. And because it also, as I said before, it's like a transport vehicle, our own little TARDIS, if you like, that takes us back in time. There's another, that's gone across many generations, hasn't it, yes. The TARDIS. And we know that music has the ability to create shared nostalgic experiences amongst people of the same generation. So it's not just me remembering something that happened when I was 12, but it's something that we went through together. So that's where we get some of those differences, I think, in terms of the nostalgia.
We spoke a bit about mental health and how it can be good for our mind, but can music be used therapeutically?
It can be, and there's lots of areas where music is used, from work with young children all the way through. And I think some of the areas where we see some really interesting impacts for people and positive benefits is for older adults, and particularly there's been some really interesting research conducted for people with dementia, because often, one of the things that remains is that connection with music. And that's why music is so powerful. It's part of who we are, and it can transport people in a particular way, which obviously therapeutically is good for people.
Very interesting. Psychology consultant and author Dr. Jo Lukens, thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan.
Hopefully we've had some great nostalgia for you today.